All right, so just so everybody knows that there will be a rather large group coming in to file in on the other side.
Check 1 2, testing 1 2, testing.
On their way in, you guys aren't going to be able to get this shot. No. You guys aren't going to be able to get this particular.
Good morning, everyone. Before I get started on why we're here, as I look out into the crowd, I just wish that the families of gun violence in this city got this much attention, because that's who really deserves the amount of attention that we're giving to this particular incident. So this morning, I come to you not only as the superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, but also as a black man who spent his entire life living in the city of Chicago. I know the racial divide that exists here. I know how hard it's been for our city and our nation to come together. And I also know the disparities, and I know the history. This announcement today recognizes that Empire actor Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of racism to promote his career. I'm left hanging my head and asking why. Why would anyone, especially an African-American man, use the symbolism of a noose to make false accusations? How could someone look at the hatred and suffering associated with that symbol and see an opportunity to manipulate that symbol to further his own public profile? How can an individual who's been embraced by the city of Chicago turn around and slap everyone in this city in the face by making these false claims? Bogus police reports cause real harm. They do harm to every legitimate victim who's in need of support by police and investigators, as well as the citizens of this city. Chicago hosts one of the largest pride parades in the world, and we're proud of that as a police department and also as a city. We do not, nor will we ever tolerate hate in our city, whether that hate is based on an individual's sexual orientation, race, or anything else. So I'm offended by what's happened, and I'm also angry. I love the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department, warts and all. But this publicity stunt was a scar that Chicago didn't earn and certainly didn't deserve. To make things worse, the accusations within this phony attack received national attention for weeks. Celebrities, news commentators, and even presidential candidates weighed in on something that was choreographed by an actor. First, Smollett attempted to gain attention by sending a false letter that relied on racial, homophobic, and political language. When that didn't work, Smollett paid $3,500 to stage this attack and drag Chicago's reputation through the mud in the process. And why? This stunt was orchestrated by Smollett because he was dissatisfied with his salary. So he concocted a story about being attacked. Now, our city has problems. We know that. We have problems that have affected people from all walks of life, and we know that. But to put the national spotlight on Chicago for something that is both egregious and untrue is simply shameful. I'm also concerned about what this means moving forward for hate crimes. Now, of course, the Chicago Police Department will continue to investigate all reports of these types of incidents with the same amount of vigor that we did with this one. But my concern is that hate crimes will now publicly be met with a level of skepticism that previously didn't happen. That said, Smollett was treated as a victim throughout this investigation until we received evidence that led detectives in another direction. I couldn't be more proud of the unrelenting detective work that went into this investigation, and I couldn't be more proud of every investigator that played a part in it. The detective work that we saw in this case is indicative of the work that our detectives do every day in this city. This case in particular involved hours of video evidence, which when combined with old-fashioned police work, uncovered the truth. These detectives deserve all the credit in the world for carefully analyzing the leads and the evidence for weeks before coming to their conclusion. I'd also like to thank the FBI for their help in this investigation. The FBI's partnership with CPD has been pivotal in this particular case. I only hope that the truth about what happened receives the same amount of attention that the hoax did. I'll continue to pray for this troubled young man who resorted to both drastic and illegal tactics to gain attention. I'll also continue to pray for our city, asking that we can move forward from this and begin to heal. And now I'd like to call up Commander Edward Wadnicki, who personally led this patient and deliberate investigation, to walk everyone through how the Chicago Police Department arrived at this point.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Edward Wadnicki. I'm the commander of the Area Central Detective Division. I'm here to answer questions. Okay. The boss just corrected me. Please forgive me. I'm supposed to go through the timeline of our investigation. It's okay. So here's where we are. As you all know, on the early morning of February 29th at 2 o'clock in the morning, Jussie Smollett reported that he was the victim of a hate crime. Detectives responded to the incident and interviewed him eventually at Northwestern Hospital, where he reported to us that the two offenders yelled racial and homophobic and political statements at him and beat him, put a noose around his neck, and threw bleach on him, and then fled from the area. We learned at the time that Jussie was not hurt, other than scratches on his face, maybe some bruising, but no broken ribs or serious injuries. So we started a full-scale investigation into this hate crime, a very serious crime anywhere. We quickly found two persons of interest on video that we believed were the likely offenders in this case. We initially put out a seeking to identify, and we got this out in a community alert. We then started searching the area for video cameras and witnesses that could help us with our investigation. During that time frame, we interviewed over 100 individuals in a canvass of the area and a follow-up canvass as our investigation expanded. We located approximately 35 of our Chicago Police pod cameras in the area and in the areas that we determined these two persons of interest fled. We additionally found over 20 private sector cameras, and I got to say that was super useful in this investigation. The city came together to investigate and help the police with this crime. It was because of these pod cameras, our investment into technology in the city of Chicago, and the great assistance from the community in giving us those other cameras that led us to a really solid timeline of where our two persons of interest went. So in short, we were able to track them initially forward. So after the crime, we were able to see that they fled in a particular direction and eventually got into a cab. That cab back to the point where the cab was tracked down by our two persons of interest in a rideshare car. We then followed up on the rideshare, and that was the lead that we needed in order to identify the two persons of interest. At that point, we had a real good timeline of where these two people went. We were able to put a name to both of these individuals, and it was at that time that we started looking at where they went right after this event. We tracked them to going to O'Hare Airport and jumping on a flight to Nigeria. Our investigation led us to determine that they had purchased a round-trip ticket with them returning to Chicago on the 13th, so approximately 2 weeks after the incident. So that gave us a couple of weeks to try to continue to follow up on any investigative lead that would help us try to determine what happened in this incident. So while we were waiting for them to return, we executed over 50 search warrants and subpoenas, working with our partners in the state's attorney's office, phone records, social media records, and records on individuals to help us illuminate the likely facts that occurred in this event. So moving forward to the 13th, we had a team in place working with the FBI, Customs, and our partners out at the airport. Airport police helped us tremendously. And we were able to locate and identify these two individuals, these two persons of interest, when they entered back into the country at customs. We took them into custody. We read them their rights, and they both initially asked for an attorney. They were brought to Area Central Detective Headquarters so that we could process them, and it was at that time that their attorney showed up. I think you've all seen her on the news the last couple of days. She came to us, and after speaking with these two people of interest, she said that something smelled fishy. She did not think that they were the offenders as were reported. She worked with us very, very closely to get to the point where she came to me and said, you really need to talk to these guys. I'm going to allow them to give you a video interview with us present, and we're going to have you hear their story. They are not offenders, they're victims. It was at that time that this investigation started to spin in a completely new direction. You've heard some of the statements that their lawyer, Ms. Schmidt, has made, and it was at that time that we took the information that these two individuals provided to us, and we substantially gave to us in this interview. We were able to substantiate 7 hours meeting us their story and documenting their story. Did we release them without charging? And I classified them no longer as suspects or persons of interest and as witnesses. So as is typical with any investigation, one would typically lock these witnesses into a grand jury statement. Monday was a holiday, the 18th. Tuesday was the first day that we could attempt to do that. So we scheduled a appointment with the grand jury, working again very closely with the state's attorney's office in this. And as you know, at the last minute, Jussie's lawyers called and said that they had evidence to postpone the grand jury that they wanted to provide to us. It was at that time that they called us, and I met with them, with a team of our detectives, and essentially they
on the FBI's investigation.
That the current narrative that's out there about how much Jussie paid the brothers is incorrect. Can the police speak to what evidence they may have that, Jussie orchestrated this attack, asked the brothers to carry out this attack, and is there any evidence of money taken from the brothers?
Yeah, we have evidence that we have the check that he used to pay them. So the $3,500 was for the two of them in total, and then $500 upon return.
Was there like an, quote, an attack on the street, or did it take place somewhere else? How did that work?
No, it took place right there. So of course it was staged. The brothers had on gloves during the staged attack where they punched him a little bit. But as far as we can tell, the scratches and bruising that you saw on his face was most likely self-inflicted.
So when you learned about the motive of this, how did you react when you learned about the motive of this? How did that teach you and all the detectives when you finally figured out what the motive was?
So let me reiterate again. You all heard me say consistently that we were treating Mr. Smollett like a victim, and we did. We might have had some peculiarities with the case, as we do with most cases. So it wasn't until the 47th hour of their 48-hour hold time that we could legally hold them in custody that it took a change. So we gave him the benefit of the doubt up until that 47th hour. But when we discovered the actual motive, quite frankly, it pissed everybody off, because we have to invest valuable resources. A lot of what I want you all to really understand is when you all put things out there into the universe that's not actual facts, then it causes us to have to chase all that stuff down. Those are resources and time spent that we'll never get back, that we could utilize for another investigation. And let me be clear about something. The shootings and homicides in this city were not impacted at all by this particular investigation. And again, we give the same amount of resources to every hate crime that's reported in this city.
Was the attack purposely done out of camera? Did they know where the cameras were?
I think that they knew where that one camera was, but unfortunately it didn't capture the event. So I believe that Mr. Smollett wanted it on camera, but unfortunately that particular camera wasn't pointing in that direction.
Search warrants were executed on Mr. Smollett's manager. Is the Chicago Police Department looking at Mr. Smollett's manager?
No, not at this time.
Mr. Smollett said that he was on the phone with his manager at
Yes.
the time. Was the manager, Brendan Moore, involved with this? Did he know it was a ruse?
He was on the phone, but whether or not he knew it was a ruse, we can't speak to right now.
Was he interviewing him?
At some point, we'll talk to him.
At one point when this case started getting pretty thick, people started pointing the finger at the police department. How did you take that when you saw people started talking negatively about the issues that were going on in the city?
It was upsetting, and I want you all to realize this. So we've been working on this investigation for about 3 weeks. We've solved several shootings and homicides in that period of time. So we don't take away resources from violent crimes of that nature just because this person is a celebrity. Again, you all gave this a lot more attention than it probably deserves. So when you get the opportunity, the shooting victims and families in this city that are victims of those crimes, give them the same amount of attention. This shouldn't have garnered the attention that it did, but it did because of his celebrity status.
From the outside looking in,
Allegedly practiced the hate crime before it actually happened. So if that was the case, why are they not being charged? Or in that situation, should they be charged? How are you guys figuring that out?
So Mr. Smollett is the one that orchestrated this crime. They became cooperating witnesses in the 47th hour of their 48-hour hold time. So now they are witnesses to what he did. So he has to be accountable for what he did. He orchestrated this.
Does being accountable mean he should have to pay all the money back that was invested in this massive investigation?
Well, I think that's a subject for another day, but of course, it's because of what he did that we had to invest all these resources.
Did Mr. Smollett make any statements while in custody? Is he still maintaining his innocence?
He hasn't made any statements at this time. No.
Superintendent, Kim Fox's decision to recuse herself affect the speed in solving this case of bringing charges?
No, Kim Fox and I, look, I'm the police superintendent. She's Cook County State's attorney. So we talk almost every day about different cases. So the fact that she recused herself didn't impact the case at all.
Did she drag her feet in any way?
Say again?
Did she drag her feet on this in any way?
Listen, we have a great relationship with our federal partners, and we certainly need to have a good relationship with our state's attorney's office, which we did. So again, you all have to remember that the erroneous rumors and innuendo that was put out there in the beginning was just that. This investigation didn't turn in the direction of Mr. Smollett being a defendant until the 47th hour that we had those two individuals in custody. So one more hour, we would have had to let them go. We may not be here today. So the state's attorney didn't drag anything. We needed to put the case together. These things take time. This isn't TV. Okay, this is real life. So it takes time.
Superintendent, there were a lot of leaks in this case. Was that intentional at all?
Well, who's to say the leaks came from us? Just because there are leaks out there doesn't necessarily mean it came from CPD. You know, I heard particular things that were out there that I knew was simply untrue. So it doesn't mean it came from the police department.
Do you have text messages or other exchanges between the brothers and Jussie?
We have the phone records that clearly indicate that they talked to each other quite a bit before the incident, after the incident, and while they were out of the country. Yes. Yes.
Superintendent, do you know that Smollett tried to make contact or made contact with the brothers after the attack?
You mean right after, like moments afterwards?
The attack or attempted to make contact and the police saw him attack?
Yeah, I just said. So we know that they talked at least an hour or so before the attack, an hour or so after the attack, and then while they were out of the country. We know that they were talking.
Did he try to recruit any other people to stage this attack, or were the brothers his first choice?
I don't know if they were his first choice, but that's who ultimately did it, but we don't have any evidence to suggest that.
Why didn't you say that the brothers might be victims in this? What did you mean by that?
That the brothers might be victims?
Yeah, were they coerced somehow or manipulated or how would you describe them? I think that's what the commander said.
Boss, I think the fact that this was staged and that Jussie hired these two guys to stage this for his benefit and then spin this into a criminal investigation put them in a really tough spot as well, to the point where now they were arrested for a hate crime, and only because of just the incredible work by the entire team did we get to the point where we're able to get the truth from them, and now we are where we are today.
Commander, why did Smollett hire those two brothers? I mean, can you describe like what their relationship was, like how close they were? Smollett was close to them?
So one of the brothers worked on Empire, so they had a relationship, an association. So he probably knew that he needed somebody with some bulk, and he knew them. They had a previous relationship, so that's probably the only reason he chose them.
Sir, did you see Jussie's interview on Good Morning America?
Good morning.
Good Morning America. Did you see the interview on ABC?
I didn't see the entire thing. I saw a couple of parts of it, and to be quite honest, it's shameful, you know, because it painted this city that we all love and work hard in a negative connotation, you know, to insinuate and to stage a hate crime of that nature when he knew as a celebrity it would get a lot of attention. It's just despicable. You know, it makes you wonder what's going through someone's mind to do something like that. So yeah, I saw a couple of parts of it, and I was angered by it, to be quite honest.
How quickly did you all know that
There were
this?
two paths. They took a ride share to the crime or on the way to the crime. Then they took a regular like yellow cab afterwards.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the ride share, which you know you have a profile for it, it had your identity, would you guys been able to figure out who these guys were?
Well, you know what, that certainly helped, and you know, their account information on that really pinpointed who they were, but who's to say whether or not we would have or not? You know, these let me tell you this. These individuals you see standing behind me, the detectives in Chicago, in my opinion, are probably some of the best detectives in this country. So I have no doubt that they would have gotten to the bottom of this, you know. Uh-oh, is that? Okay. Yeah, that's last call before closing.
How quickly after this crime was reported did you all figure out, or think that something doesn't add up?
Well, to be perfectly honest, from the very beginning, we had some questions about it. But as I said, we gave Mr. Smollett the benefit of the doubt all the way up until that 47th hour of the 48 hours we could hold those two individuals, because we just didn't have the total package to support that it was a hoax. So when you heard me coming out saying we are treating him like a victim, that was the truth, because at that time, that's what he was. And I think anybody that reports a crime deserves the Chicago Police Department to treat them in.
When was it in the investigation when you realized their names and who they were? Was it when you tracked?
That was after the ride share account, yes.
What day was that? When was that in the investigation?
Remember what day that was?
About a week later.
Superintendent, the one piece of evidence then just confirming that he wanted was not found on camera, the roughhousing, the minor
No.
state meeting. It's not on camera anymore.
That was the one piece. We have about, I would say about 2 hours of footage back and forth, and those few minutes were not on.
Can you go over police report on him?
Say again?
Was it police report on him?
We don't know. Yeah, okay, thank you all. Say again? Well, that's at the 47th hours when the two brothers decided, like the commander reiterated that with the help of their lawyer, they decided to confess to the entirety of what the plot was. Okay.
Eddie, Andre Smith, is there racism or discrimination with
Say that again?
You said you want Smollett to be held accountable. I'm curious what is justice in your eyes?
Absolute justice would be an apology to this city that he smeared, admitting what he did, and then be man enough to offer what he should offer up in terms of all the resources that were put into this. Thank you all.
Superintendent, is there racism or discrimination within the Department of the Detectives? Why ain't the South Side and the West Side and the Black community getting the same service? Why 24 detectives to this service? Why don't we get the same service when Black lives are being killed and murdered on the street?
Was behind that particular letter. When the outrage of that letter didn't work, he paid $3,500 to those two brothers for the attack, and then an additional $500 when those brothers returned from Nigeria. What was interesting, and it's the motive, we've been talking about this for a long time, why? We found out just a moment ago from the superintendent, he was motivated because Jussie Smollett was apparently dissatisfied with his salary.
And the fallout from this doesn't stop with this particular charge that was filed last night, this disorderly conduct charge that resulted from filing a false report. Now there will absolutely be follow-up with federal authorities when it comes to this letter that Smollett, according to police, sent the week before he reported the attack, which involves federal investigators. It involves the United States Postal Service. We'll bring in our legal expert, Gil Sofer. This is extremely consequential.
Extremely. That's a remarkable statement. This is a police department that's very confident in its evidence. Yeah. But we learned two, I think, monumental things. One is he wrote that letter. Mm-hmm. The other is that there was phone traffic between him and the brothers before and after the incident. That's devastating, corroborating evidence. But you're right, as to the letter, that makes it very much in play for federal investigators to pursue, if they wish, federal charges.
Do you think, based on what we now know, that they will?
Well, they could, and now they may work with the police department and say, let's decide what a just outcome is here, and if they can get it through the state prosecution, then they may leave well enough alone. If not, they may pursue it separately federally.
And they now have corroborating witnesses. One of the takeaways from this, I thought, was to smile. You're on camera. They have these two brothers who were a paid party to this alleged crime that were caught on camera both before after and leading up to their departure from the United States on the way to Nigeria. I mean, police have a ton of video data on these two men.
A lot of evidence.
From private security cameras, from public city cameras. They have it on phone records. They did really, I have to say, hearing him describe what they did, this is classic detective work. They seem to have done a very good job, and they did it pretty quickly.
They did it, but they didn't rush, which was also an important thing. Want to get to a statement that we got from the mayor. This was while the superintendent was speaking. It says, in part, I want to thank all of the Chicago police officers who have worked on this case and all the private citizens and business owners who have stepped forward with information and video evidence to help us get to the bottom of what was reported as a hate crime.
He says all across Chicago, in every neighborhood, there are signs in front yards and in windows that read, "Hate has no home here." It's a sign that expresses our shared values and defines our great city. Chicago's message to the world is that no matter where you come from, who you love, or how you pray, you will always have a home here. Our laws exist to reflect and defend those values, and hate crimes will never be tolerated. A single individual who put their perceived self-interest ahead of these shared principles will never trump Chicago's collective spirit. A lot of anger at this false claim of an attack, of a hate crime, in a city where I think a lot of people felt that it was out of place.
We heard Chicago's police superintendent, we heard Eddie Johnson say that the city of Chicago did not deserve this and did not earn this. And he came out right at the beginning and said families of gun violence should get this much attention. He spoke to his race, talked about himself being a black man, spending his entire life in the city of Chicago. He said he knows the racial divide and disparities in the city, and that Jussie Smollett took advantage of the pain and anger of that to further his career. And he has asked himself over and over again why a black man would make these kind of accusations and use a noose to enhance his public profile.
And brazenly appear on a national broadcast on the ABC exclusive with Robin Roberts to recount what police are now saying is a false narrative. When asked at the end of the news conference what would constitute justice in this case, Superintendent Eddie Johnson said that it would consist of an apology to the city of Chicago for the damage and the attention that it brought to the city, the negative attention that it brought to the city after the alleged false report, an admission of guilt, and then also offering resources, presumably to compensate police for all of the work that went into this investigation.
So much to talk about and so much news that was made there. We're going to keep you updated with any breaking developments on this on our free news app. You see it right there. Make sure you have it. We're still going to continue to push this. Again, don't forget about that hearing that's a little bit later on this afternoon, that bond hearing at 1:30. You can follow us here on air and online as Jussie Smollett heads to court for the first time this afternoon. Much more on our news at 11 o'clock and at abc7chicago.com.
This has been a special report from ABC7 Eyewitness News. We now return to our regular program schedule.
Broken bones, dehydration, or even death, you may be entitled to a substantial settlement. If you have a loved one who is injured in a nursing